I am Vasil Lomachenko. You're watching Dante's Boxing Nation.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So the Golovkin versus Wade TV ratings are in, and it turns out it was a very successful night. Congratulations to Golovkin. They pulled in 1,325,000 views, roughly 1.3 million views. These were actually the highest numbers on HBO for the year for a boxing event. So that's a feather in Gennady Golovkin's cap. But check this out though. If we are to listen to the decaf's logic, then these numbers are not impressive at all. Once again, only if we are to listen to the hypocritical ass decafs in the sport of boxing, which are the extremely biased writers and fans, etc., etc. Allow me to elaborate. See, let me tell you what the new media is about. The new media is about treating all fighters and everyone in the sport the exact same way. In other words, all fighters, promoters, etc., advisors are created equal. That means if this guy to my right gets 100% on his test and this guy to the left gets 100% on his test, they get the same amount of praise. The new media are reporters that go out, interview these fighters, cover these events, and make sure things are on an even playing field. That is not what the old media represents. And I can give you guys a perfect example. Like I always say, it's so ironic that we always get a perfect side-by-side comparison so you can see the double standards so clearly. Let me give you an example. It was only, about 2 weeks ago that Errol Spence knocked out Chris Algieri, right? Now, would it surprise you guys that more people watch Errol Spence knock out Chris Algieri than Golovkin's annihilation of Dominic Wade? That's right. Golovkin he peaked at 1.3 million views, and Errol Spence versus Algieri peaked at 1.4 million views. Now, I know what you guys are going to say. You're going to say, hey, Dante, but that's different because Chris Algieri and Errol Spence, that was on free TV. That was on NBC, etc., etc., etc. Now, this is going to really surprise you. Did you guys know that Golovkin versus Wade was also on free TV last week? That's right, because HBO was for free last week. That means the same amount of people that had access to NBC to watch Errol Spence beat Algieri had access to HBO, had access to watch Golovkin versus Wade for free. So when Errol Spence got 100% on his test, you know what some of the writers in the media said? The old media, you know what they said? They said, oh, well, these numbers are really not that good because NBC has so many subscribers and 1 million views on regular TV. It's not that good. They start comparing the numbers to the UFC. They start comparing the numbers to regular TV shows on NBC or on TV, period. You know, the time slot. Everything was negative when it came to the people on the coincidental list. You see, once again, this is the old media. You get 100% on the test and you still don't get the credit. But yet, Gennady Golovkin, he does 1.3 million, less than 1.4 million, obviously, and he gets more credit. You see how the double standards work? You know, it's really ironic because what HBO just did is they just completely debunked any theory of these decafs saying Errol Spence numbers against Chris Algieri were not good numbers because it was on free TV. By HBO putting their fight on free TV, it clearly proves that if Gennady Golovkin's numbers at 1.3 million on free TV were good numbers, then Spence vs. Algieri numbers were even better. Once again, both cards were on free TV. I mean, I really want you guys to think about this. Once again, they kept saying that Errol Spence versus Algieri should have did better numbers because they have so many subscribers on NBC. But do you know that when HBO, one of the biggest networks on cable, one of the biggest movie channels, the biggest movie channel actually, when they give you a free week to watch, guess what that means? That means ton of new viewers are gonna flood in watching HBO that week because it's for free. And you don't get to watch HBO for free too often. Now, when it comes to NBC, you can always watch NBC for free, so that's not special. But you're gonna jump at the opportunity to watch HBO for free because you don't know when they're gonna give out another free week to watch HBO, right? This is the whole reason why HBO and other movie channels, they do this, right? So that they can get a whole bunch of people to watch that week. And what's interesting is Gennady Golovkin, he didn't really get a bump from those additional viewers tuning in to HBO. Now, according to the decafs, if we were talking about someone on a coincidental list, this would be a bad thing. This would prove that these numbers are nothing. These numbers are average, below average. Because this is what they were saying about Errol Spence. Once again, that's the old media. You give credit to one guy that gets 100% on the test, but you don't give credit to the other guy that gets the exact same score, if not higher. Matter of fact, in this situation, you're talking about one guy damn near getting 90% on the test and another guy getting 100% on the test. But the old media, they will give credit to the guy who got 90% on this test, but not the guy that got 100%. Because the guy that got 90% on his test, Gennady Golovkin, he has his hope insurance, so he's covered. But Errol Spence and Al Heyman, they don't have that insurance, so they don't get the same type of praise. You see how those double standards work? Notice this too, because these decafs are very, very clever. You see, they'll also try to take away credit from PBC by comparing current PBC numbers to previous PBC numbers, right? Like I told you on previous videos, notice they're not comparing PBC numbers to Top Rank or Golden Boy numbers. They're comparing PBC to PBC, right? So in other words, if PBC puts on a card that does, let's say, like Keith Thurman versus Robert the Ghost Guerrero, which peaked at 4 million views, right? Let's say they come back like they did with Danny Garcia versus Lamont Peterson. That fight did over 2 million views. Now, instead of giving them way more credit or the same type of credit that they would give Golovkin Wade numbers, you know what they say? They say, oh, but those numbers weren't as good as the previous numbers. PBC is on the decline right now, right? So even though that's 1 million more views than Golovkin versus Wade, when you're on the coincidental list, those are not good numbers because they're comparing PBC numbers to previous PBC numbers. In other words, if Usain Bolt, if he keeps beating everyone on the track, right? And let's say, before he beat everyone by 2 seconds. And then in his most recent race, he won the race by a nose, right? Or he won the race by a half a second. And they try to say, oh yeah, but he didn't smoke everyone the way he did in the last race. He ain't as good as he was before. You're only comparing Bolt to himself, right? I mean, but talking about numbers declining and this is not a good sign for PBC, et cetera, if that's the case, we can say the same thing with HBO. Because if you guys recall, when Canelo fought against James Kirkland, those views were over 2 million. And HBO, they haven't done those numbers since James Kirkland and Canelo faced off. So we could use the same logic that the decafs are using for PBC. Oh, they're on the decline. Oh, the numbers have been getting lower and lower ever since the Kirkland versus, or the Canelo versus Kirkland fight. You see how the double standards work, but they're not going to say that. They're only going to say that when it comes to people who don't have their hope insurance, right? Because they're not covered. So, everything that I'm saying, it really has nothing to do with Golovkin. It has something to do with the people that are covering the sport. It's the decafs that cover the sport, the old media, and it's the decafs in the comment section that regurgitate everything that these biased reporters say. Once again, with the new media, everyone is created equal. If you get 100% on your test, you are going to get the same credit as everyone else that gets that score. So the bottom line is, these Golovkin versus Wade numbers, they were good numbers. The Errol Spence versus Chris Algieri numbers, they were better numbers. And Andre Ward versus Barrera, which did over 1 million, those were good numbers. Considering the fact that you had mainstream media outlets like ESPN that basically tried to boycott the fight because they refused to even cover it. That is the disdain they have for Andre Ward. Andre Ward has been cursed because he had the nerve to call out Gennady Golovkin. Ever since Andre Ward called out Gennady Golovkin, he has been hated something awful. This is how they operate, guys. This is how they operate. So once again, like I said, Andre Ward, without really too much support from the mainstream media, he still did over 1 million views. And Gennady Golovkin, with all the support in the world from the mainstream media and a free week of HBO, he did 1.3 million. Okay? Now keep in mind, before those numbers, Golovkin's highest numbers was when he fought against Willie Monroe. And guess what? He did around the same amount of numbers. He actually, I think the numbers averaged at 1.2 million and they peaked at 1.3 million. And that was a week when HBO wasn't for free. So once again, that just goes to show you, you can't sit over here and say, oh, well, Errol Spence, he was fighting on free TV. So since NBC has so many subscribers, 10 million people should have tuned in, etc. Because that wasn't the case with Golovkin versus Wade. See, this is the reason why it's better to just tell the truth instead of having this heart full of hate and basing everything off of your emotion, off of you personally not liking someone. Because then you're forced to lie. And once you tell one lie, you gotta keep lying to cover up the original lie. And then when the fighter that you actually like is put in the exact same predicament, now you look like a hypocrite. Because now you're forced to praise the fighter that's on a Gaddy list when you were just taking the credit away from the guy on the coincidental list for getting the exact same score on the test. Now see, if you would have been like the new media and you would have just gave both of them credit, then you wouldn't look like a damn hypocrite. Food for thought. That's all I got. I'm on to the next one.